Time is the ultimate universal currency. The more we all spend of it, the less we have. In this regard, it makes it our most precious resource, so when it comes to free time, we want to make sure we're spending it wisely and really doing what we enjoy. For me, and I'm assuming you as well considering you clicked on this video, some of this time is spent playing video games. For as long as I can remember, it's always been this way. As a kid, I certainly played my fair share of platformers, shooters, action titles, sports games, and all that good stuff. However, JRPGs were always my favorite. I just gravitated towards their more story-driven nature, complex characters, and immersive worlds. And it just so happened that they were often long, like very long, like a lot longer than most of their contemporaries. This only increased my infatuation more. Why would I want to get a game that I can just beat in a few hours when I can instead play this epic adventure that's gonna take me 50 plus hours? In my mind back then, more equaled better. The longer a game was, the more epic and amazing it was gonna be. To be fair, in a lot of cases, this did hold true. Not only were titles like Xenogears absolutely incredible experiences regardless of the game length, but my 90-hour runtime and wrapping things up just gave me a real feeling of accomplishment and sense of pride. It was like a JRPG badge of honor. For having beat a game of that size and scope, you just felt cool. And yes, I'm well aware that you can beat the game much quicker than that, but what can I say? I was 12 years old and got lost a lot and probably only comprehended like 10% of the story. With that said, even though Xenogears was longer than the average RPG itself was still pretty long. This only seemed to increase with each console generation as well. But first, let's get into the sponsor of our video, Wandering Sword. Wandering Sword is an RPG that takes place in ancient China where you play as a young swordsman and martial artist who's destined to become a hero and change the fate of the world. As you can instantly tell, the game looks absolutely gorgeous and uses that HD 2D style found in games like Octopath Traveler, Triangle Strategy, and the Live Alive remake. Surprisingly, there's not really a lot of RPGs that take place in ancient China or Asia in general, so getting more games in settings like this is just awesome to see. Despite it looking like a Chinese Octopath Traveler though, the combat plays out much differently. Instead, battles feature grid-based tactical gameplay, just quicker and smaller scale than your average SRPG. There's also a way to toggle between turn-based and real-time as well. Unlike most other tactical RPGs though, there's still a lot of exploration both in towns and on the overworld. All the various towns I saw looked beautiful and the world map was a stunning sight to behold. And combine this with extremely chill and relaxing Asian music that fits the vibe perfectly, and you have an absolute top-notch atmosphere in Wandering Sword. If you've been a long-time watcher of the channel, you'll have noticed we've never had a sponsor on a video before despite being approached by many. Blade Battle Reverends. Especially with games, given the nature of our channel, we wanted to hold out for something that we actually thought was a quality experience and worth people's time. I played the demo of Wandering Sword and while it was only a 2 to 3 hour demo, my first impressions were very strong. The game is a part of the Steam Next Fest in February 2023 with a link to its demo in our video description. If it looks up your alley, feel free to download the demo and add the game to your wishlist if you like it. Thank you Wandering Sword for sponsoring this video. Now back to the main topic. Length in JRPGs. Most 8-bit RPGs were 10 to 20 hours, most 16-bit RPGs were 20 to 30 hours, and during the PS1 era, 30 to 50 hour RPGs became the norm. And so yeah, it wasn't just me that had the whole more is better mentality back then. The JRPG landscape as a whole seemed to embody this idea. It makes sense too. Hardware limitations that once set boundaries on how much you could fit into a game were now being lifted with each passing generation. And this is why the original Dragon Quest can be beaten under 10 hours, whereas Dragon Quest VII on the other hand takes you closer to 100 hours. A bit of an extreme difference you could say. Now, when the PS2 era came around, JRPG links didn't change that much. I mean yeah, Dragon Quest VIII was significantly shorter than 7, but it was still very long. And games like Persona 3 and 4 were even longer, taking you around 80 hours or more. JRPGs were always known for their lengths, but the PS1 and PS2 generations really ramped this up. For the most part, this has only increased with time. JRPGs on average are perhaps the longest they've ever been. Games like Persona 5 can take you over 100 hours, and while Xenogears was once considered super long for the genre, it's now shorter than any mainline game in the Xenoblade series. The question is though, is this a good thing? 11-year-old me would have said yes, but now, 20 years older me, the answer isn't as clear. An obvious argument could be made that I just said younger me would have preferred longer games, so maybe I just simply have aged out of the target demographic. Well, possibly, but I don't think the answer is quite that simple. In our most recent video about cozy and relaxing RPGs, there's a part where I mentioned that as a kid, I quit most RPGs about 20 to 30 hours in. It got me thinking, there's gotta be a reason why for that. Obviously, it was a case-by-case basis. Some games just flat out appeal to me more. However, subjective taste aside, some games did just do a better job at keeping my interest with fun gameplay and a well-paced story. Chrono Trigger is the perfect example of this. I didn't even play it until 10 years after it came out, and it still managed to hook me in and enthrall me enough to beat it on my first playthrough. Something that no other 16-bit RPG besides Super Mario RPG had done for me before. Now, why is that? Well, my friends, there's one simple answer. The pacing. If your game is paced well, a 20-hour journey can feel just as epic as a 50-hour one. Another way of looking at this is quality of game time versus quantity of game time. In Chrono Trigger, everything has purpose and contributes to the narrative in some way, or fleshes out the characters more. You never stay in any one place for too long, but still long enough to leave an impact on you. Not only are the story beats and locations handled well with pacing, but the gameplay is as well. Visible enemies on screen and no random encounters on the world map help a lot with this, plus the loading times going into battles are really quick. Battles take place on the same screen as exploration and have a seamless transition, and it's nice. When you combine all of these factors, you have an extremely well-paced adventure that can be beaten in about 20 hours or 100% completed in about 25 hours. All those side quests feature either plot significance or character development as well. There's virtually no filler here. Everything is meaningful and fun. It's not hard to see why it's often considered the gold standard for JRPG pacing. Games like the aforementioned Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars, and the first Suikoden game also do pacing really well. They don't outstay their welcome and wrap up in a time-appropriate, satisfying manner. Similar to Chrono Trigger, battles in Suikoden move very quick overall, which really helps the game feel like it respects your time. Unfortunately, not all PS1 RPG battles were handled in the same way. Even though I really love them and they're some of my all-time favorites, battles in games like Final Fantasy IX, Breath of Fire 3, Legend of Legaia, The Legend of Dragoon, and etc. all move extremely slow. A good amount of these games' links are just because the battles take so long. Reduce the loading time, speed up the animations, and you could probably trim off like 5 hours or more. This would bring them closer to 30 to 40 hours, which would be about perfect in my opinion. It should also be noted, besides Final Fantasy IX, I didn't beat any of these on my first playthrough, and I think battle pacing played a bit of a role. However, another reason why I put some games down is just because some parts simply weren't very fun. I mean, come on, did anyone really enjoy the Shisu quest from Breath of Fire 3? It was boring, a waste of time, and just took away time that could have been spent on more interesting things. That brings me to an earlier point. Quality of game time versus quantity of game time. If a game respects your time and fills it with engaging, relevant content, it can get by with a longer playtime because it doesn't feel like it's that long. You know what they say, time flies when you're having fun. Put in a bunch of content that doesn't feel like it has much of a purpose, and I'm not having that much fun anymore. Not everything has to drive the main story forward, but it should either further establish the lore of the world, give you new insight to characters, places, or events, or give more personality to characters or develop them in some way, whether individually or their relationships with others. Chrono Trigger does this, and it's why most people beat the game and all of its side quests without feeling burnt out. On the flip side, that's probably why most people opt to not 100% complete most of the Xenoblade games. But hey, more content for those that want it isn't a bad thing. It is extra after all. You can always just focus on the main story if you want to. But what about games where the main story itself has slow pacing? Dragon Quest VII, I'm looking at you. The original PS1 version, that is. You don't get in your first fight until like 2 hours into the game and don't unlock the class system until over 20 hours. That's longer than some other PS1 RPGs like Suikoden even are. Die-hard Dragon Quest fans are down for that slow build-up and payoff, but most other gamers, and hell, even most other RPG gamers, are not. It's just simply too long for most people. And Square Enix would sort of address this in the 3DS version by removing most of the intro and cutting back on the grinding. And this helped a bit, but the game is still extremely long. It took me a year and a half to beat, playing it sporadically. I will say though that finally beating it did give me a really satisfying feeling. Going back to what I said earlier about beating a long game like Xenogears feeling like a badge of honor, I think that's where some of the appeal in these long RPGs come from. It's not just the protagonist completing their long, challenging journey, but you as well. With that said, just because you can make a game super long, does that always mean you should? A lot of people felt that Act 3 in Dragon Quest XI wasn't even necessary and just made a long game that already had a satisfying conclusion even longer. There's something to be said about knowing when to wrap up your story. I do still think really long RPGs have their place though. If a game has a good story to tell, it can take as long as it needs. It does give the big budget titles a bit of a grander, more epic feeling. Just make sure it has a reason for being long. If a lot of the game's length comes from boring fetch quests, irrelevant content, and a bunch of grinding, then it has no business being that long. Trim the fat and make every part of the journey enjoyable. I can guarantee you the games that people are replaying the most often have the highest percentage of fun content and the lowest percentage of boring content. Sometimes less is more, and always quality over quantity. Alright, and that about wraps up this video. Thanks for watching, everyone. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please either consider hitting that like button or subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I know this was a way shorter video than the ones we usually do, but we wanted to give you guys something to chew on while we work on this Wild Arms retrospective. Truth be told, I originally had a very different script direction for this video where I was going to talk about what's the perfect length for a JRPG and stuff like that, but I realized that was obviously subjective and I could still get the same point across in sort of a different way. To quickly answer that question though, since I didn't find a way to work it into the main script, I think that 20 to 30 hours for the main story and 5 to 10 hours of side content is about perfect for 16-bit RPGs, and for the big budget AAA games, I think about 30 to 50 hours is more appropriate, and maybe about 20 hours or so of side content. 70+ hour RPGs can still be fun if they're that fun, I guess, but it's probably gonna be a one and done for me. Anything over 100 hours though, I don't think I want anything to do with you anymore. There's a reason why games like Chrono Trigger, Suikoden, and Super Mario RPG are my favorites to replay. The same with the ports of the PS1 Final Fantasies. That fast forward option during battles is a godsend. It makes FF9 infinitely more replayable, and being my favorite in the series, I'm down with that. Anyway, I'm rambling a lot now, but what do you guys think is about a perfect length for a JRPG? Also, what are some of your favorite JRPGs to replay, and why? Let us know in the comments below. I'm sure we can get some good discussion going on. As always, just want to give a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters, and an extra special shout out to our top patrons, Derek Drost, Jesse Spencer, Jump Rock, and Saino. All of your support and generosity is very much appreciated. Other than that, thanks again for watching, everyone, and hope you have an awesome day. This is Corbin from Gaming Productions. Until next time.